What's up, guys, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here on video format on this show. There's going to be a day off from Browns practice recaps. They practice indoors. The footage is not available, so it'd be impossible for me to give any real insight on what happened there. So no recap for yesterday's practice, unfortunately, but we can talk about what we've seen so far through question format, and we're going to start with one of the most interesting questions, what's going on with Harrison Bryant and David Njoku. And on that subject, this question is from Tay, the creator, who says, hey, Quincy, at this point, with how Harrison Bryant is performing in training camp, would you seek a trade for Njoku, even though he said he's committed to the Browns for now? A lot of what I said in the offseason is manifesting itself right now in football form, right? I said all along, Harrison Bryant has looked like a better fit when you look at a skill set perspective for a tight end 2 position next to Austin Hooper than David Njoku. David Njoku has his positives. He's big, he's athletic, he can jump really high. He has his negatives, not the greatest blocker in the world, both pass and run. Also, not the greatest and most reliable catcher of the football. And those are 2 things that become a massive problem when you are the second tight end in a 2 tight end kind of system. So me seeing that, I've said all along that Harrison Bryant would be a better fit. Then camp comes along, we put all these theories into practice, and lo and behold, Harrison Bryant has looked like a better fit 99% of the time. I can't even count the amount of Harrison Bryant highlights I've had to put in every Browns training camp recap video that I've done so far this year. It's been that good from Harrison Bryant. Like, he's making plays, he can jump, he can catch, he can block, he can play fullback. Let's not forget he played H-back a little bit at Florida Atlantic, I believe. So, like, this dude has everything you would want. The one thing people worried about was he big enough to make that transition immediately and play in NFL? And it looks like he's held up physically fine in training camp so far, and he's still able to make plays, and he's still able to get open. So you put all of that, and then you combine that with David Njoku, who's been on highlights for dropping balls, having defensive players make plays on him, or just not practicing because he's hurt. This is not a good combination of things for David Njoku. Now, does that mean the Browns are going to trade him? I don't think the Browns were ever going to be able to trade him because he has that 5th-year extension. And once he has that, he's virtually untradeable. You can only really cut him, and I don't even know the consequences for cutting him at that point. I have to research that. So, like, the likelihood of this guy getting traded is 0. Eric Ebron, a better tight end at this point in his career, could not get traded with the Detroit Lions because he had a 5th-year option. No team wanted to pick that up. The same thing's going to happen to David Njoku. Nobody's going to pick him up because he has that 5th-year option pickup. So if you trade for him, you're also trading for that 5th-year option. Nobody wants to do that. They rather wait till he gets cut and get him off waivers. That's what teams would rather do to get out of that. So that's the reality for David Njoku. That's why he had to take down the trade request. It's because he couldn't get traded. He was never going to be able to get traded, so he might as well rescind it so it doesn't look bad to the rest of the locker room. Because I think David Njoku's role this season is going to be a part of the furniture of the locker room. I don't think you're going to see much out of him. Harrison Bryant's outplayed him. Farrell Brown's a better blocker than him, so Farrell Brown makes more sense to put at tight end 3. Austin Hooper is clearly the number 1 tight end. Where does he fit in? As a 4th tight end? Maybe if you have a special package? This Browns offense has not put a tight end out wide at all camp. They have not practiced that, so I don't know if that's in the card for David Njoku's. The long story short, David Njoku's future in Cleveland is very, very, very dim because of his own level of play, and he's just not a great fit. The next question comes from Giants Nation, who says, what's up, Quincy? A little late posting here. I'm on a lunch break right now. Shout out to you and lunch breaks. Shout out to everybody on a lunch break. But my question is, how do you think Daniel Jones will do? I wanted to ask someone who isn't a Giants fan because you won't have any bias. Do you think Danny Dimes will be good next year or have a sophomore slump? I think it's more likely that he has a slump. Now, due to how like people kind of got carried away with Danny Dimes, expect that if he has a slump, people are going to go over the top of how bad he plays or how bad he looks. It's not going to be that bad. Same thing as Baker Mayfield last year. It's not going to be that bad. I think Danny Dimes is a starting NFL quarterback. I don't know if he's a game-changing NFL quarterback. I don't know if I've seen any evidence of that. So I think he'll have a step back, and I think that's because I don't love the weapons around him. Sure, you have Saquon, but Saquon can only do so much by himself. And with that offensive line, it just looks really questionable at this point for that entire Giants offensive unit. So that's why I would say pump the brakes on Danny Dimes. He's probably going to have a sophomore slump. Next question comes from Zachary Chad, who says, do you think the lackluster offensive practices are a result of a limited offseason, or do you think there is something more of it? I mean, here's the thing, right? We're going to put a training camp level of focus on these practices that are essentially spruced up, pumped up OTA practices. And OTA practices aren't pretty, but we don't normally see OTA practices, so we can't really judge it or say that they had a bad or slow day. We're kind of relying off of different reports, and it's not as direct as being able to watch the live stream of the practice. So that being said, I think, yeah, it has part to do with the shortened offseason, because what we're seeing is a much more raw version of this offense than we would see in most normal years. We're seeing the installation phase, essentially, to this offense while they try to get it off the ground enough to have something to put up against Baltimore. That being said, as tough as I am on the offense when they have bad days, I firmly do not believe this offense is anywhere near behind schedule when it comes to that. I think they're pretty good, if not ahead of schedule, because when they aren't sloppy overall as a team, they look good. Like, this offense looks good, and this is an offense that's not really designed to look good in a practice environment. It's really a game offense where you're relying on teams kind of bodying up against the run during a drive because you ran it 6-7 times in a row so you can fool them with a play action. Right now, they don't have that advantage. Right now, they can only really set up and play each play at a time. And with that context in line, I think the offense is pretty ahead of schedule. If you ask me if this offense looks as sloppy as the offense did last offseason when they had all that stuff, I would say this year's offense, despite all that, is ahead of where last year's offense was. And that's a huge indictment on Freddie Kitchens. Don't get me wrong, but that's also the situation going on in Berea. So while they don't look good some days, while they have bad days, you know, that's the ebb and flows of camp. But I don't think this offense is anything to worry about the way they've looked. If they had more days like they had, like after Grant Delpit got hurt, that one practice they had, if they have like 3-4 more days like that, I would be concerned. But so far, it doesn't look like that's going to be the normal. That was just one bad day. Next question comes from Wally Ahmad, who says, what's up, Q? Who are the 4 core players you want to see here for years to come from what we know now? Nick Chubb, Baker Mayfield, Jarvis Landry, Myles Garrett. I think if you have those 4, you have something. With those 3 on offense, I think you have a good enough offense to be able to do a lot of different things. I love OBJ. I'm not going to include him in the top 4 core players because he's really good as a piece that can get you large chunks and can get you a lot of things. That's really good. But Jarvis is really good for an offense that just needs to work the ball down the field in a run-heavy scheme. So that's why I would pick Jarvis. He's just a better fit there. Baker, you want consistency at the quarterback position. Nick Chubb, obviously, if you're going to be run-heavy, you want the best running back in football, in my opinion, in Nick Chubb. And Myles Garrett, because Myles Garrett makes it a lot more acceptable to have a lot more mistakes when it comes to the personnel of the defensive side of football. He just makes up for so many bad decisions. So Myles Garrett is most definitely a core player that you need to keep, because with Myles Garrett on that defense, you have a chance for your defense not to be terrible. That's just the reality of it. So those are the 4 players I would go with. This next question comes from Travis Jacobs, who says, here's my question. Who do you think the Browns should trade for? And should we trade Njoku in a package for somebody? the Browns ain't going to be able to find anybody who's going to want to trade for Njoku. Unless the Browns are willing to take on a bad contract to get rid of Njoku, I don't see that happening. I don't see a trade happening for David Njoku. Who should the Browns trade for? Sean Lee. I've said it plenty of times. Makes a lot of sense here. He's a good coverage linebacker. What you don't have in your linebacking room is good coverage linebackers. You got some decent guys against the run with Sione and B.J. Goodson. You need somebody who can cover a little bit. Sean Lee would make sense. Experience at the position. I would love a Sean Lee signing. That's what I would want, a Sean Lee trade. So that's what I would say the Browns should trade for. This next question comes from Shay, who says, hey, Quincy, how do you feel about Kevin Stefanski and how he's running camp? Feel like he's doing a great job. I said earlier, I think this team, despite all of the things they have had to deal with, is somehow more in tune than last year's unit. Now, granted, this unit, these players have been together for an extra year, so that actually matters. Freddie Kitchens didn't have that advantage, but also Freddie Kitchens had an entire offseason program, and Kevin Stefanski didn't. So those things kind of offset each other. I think Kevin Stefanski has done a pretty good job given the cards that he was dealt at the beginning of his reign as the Browns head coach. So with all that considered, I think he's done a pretty great job, honestly, running camp. It's consistent. As somebody who watches it every day, they have it. You know exactly when they're going to do 11-on-11s, 7-on-7s, back to 11-on-11s, 2 end zone drills. That's a level of consistency, punctualness that has not existed in previous Browns regimes. So just given off of everything that I've seen so far when it comes to the structure of practice, I've been encouraged by what Kevin Stefanski has done, especially since he was dealt a raw hand when it comes to that specific element of things. Next question comes from D. Wright Truth in Our Eyes, who says, do you still have confidence in our defense with the loss of Delpit and Wilson? I think I've elaborated on this, but yes, largely yes. I think the loss of Wilson is kind of hard to grasp how much that's going to hurt this defense. When it comes to Delpit, I feel like we're going to probably miss him the least because Andrew Sedeo is a really good replacement. Like, this is one of the guys who was one of the top 32 safeties in the NFL last year. He was pretty good. He grades pretty closely to Earl Thomas did last year. So that's encouraging. Like, he has better PFF grades than Demarius Randall. So all in all, you're still getting an upgrade at that free safety position, and there's just so much depth in that defensive back room that I feel confident in their ability to pivot and adjust to this. Even if they don't have Greedy Williams, they still have Terrence Mitchell. They still can get Kevin Johnson back, hopefully. There's a bunch of things on this secondary that just are so flexible because you have so much depth and versatility in it. The next question comes from the Vault Dweller, who says, who do you see regressing on the team? The one guy I've seen regress is David Njoku. I thought it was going to be Rashard Higgins on that list, but Rashard Higgins, give him his credit, has had pretty good days in camp the last few days in a row. Good connection with Baker Mayfield, making some plays, getting open, getting the ball. Can't hate on him. He's actually looked pretty good so far lately in practice. David Njoku, on the other hand, he has been as disappointing as Harrison Bryant has been impressive. And think about all the articles, all the praise you've seen of Harrison Bryant, and then think of the inverse of that. And that's what David Njoku's been when it comes to being disappointing. He has not showed up. He's not been helped. Like, what are the key criticisms of David Njoku and the reasons that Browns fans might not want him around long term? Can't catch, can't block, can't stay on the field. What has he not been able to do throughout camp? Catch, block, and stay on the field. I don't believe anything's changed there with David Njoku that gives me any reason to believe that he's going to be somebody who deserves playing time, especially when you have somebody like Harrison Bryant who has stepped up in first-team reps as of late. And when he wasn't stepping up, and when he wasn't with the first team, he was absolutely eating the second and third team. This is a dude who's going to get first-team reps, and that's going to be at the expense of somebody. Farrell Brown is the best blocking tight end this team has. He's in a battle with Steven Carlson for that extra blocker tight end role, and that's probably going to be Farrell Brown if he can stay out of fights during training camp. You look at number one, it's obviously Austin Hooper. It's going to be nobody else but Austin Hooper. So the only other tight end that can be used is tight end 2. And Harrison Bryant has looked so much better than David Njoku this camp. It's not funny, and he's been healthy during camp. That's going to mean something. And when you talk about the player regressing, It's going to be David Njoku. And you look at what he did last year, it would be hard to regress from that because he was out, and when he got back, he didn't play. But expect that to continue if he stays on the Browns. Like, the best thing that can happen for David Njoku is that he gets cut. If that doesn't happen, then he's just not going to see the field very often this year. Next question comes from Scarehouse Tim Zombie, who says, hey, Quincy, love your channel. Thank you very much. Want to ask you, if you think the coach is on the short leash with Baker, how long do you think before he would put Keenum in? Ain't no short leash on Baker this year. I don't know where that report came from. Ain't no short leash on Baker. That's just not me thinking it. You watch these practices, ain't no short leash on Baker. They are not preparing for life without Baker Mayfield at all during these practices. This is Baker Mayfield's team, quite honestly. It's obviously Baker Mayfield's team. I don't think there's that much of a leash on him. Like, there's a leash on every starting quarterback in the NFL. Like, even Deshaun Watson, if he went out there and threw 12 interceptions in 3 games, you would have to consider benching him. But Baker Mayfield, I don't see any leash. I don't see any quick pull for Baker Mayfield. I don't see any lack of patience for Baker Mayfield in the way this camp has gone, in the way the coaches talked about him, in the way that everything's gone down behind the scenes. There's no leash on him. So what would it take for Case Keenum to get on the field? A eruption of interceptions, like a disgusting amount of interceptions within a short period of time? Or, you know, Baker having to miss a game because of an injury or something else? Like, that's what would get Case Keenum in the game. But outside of that, I don't think there's really that much of a leash on him. So I wouldn't expect it. The last question of the day comes from Smitty80. And it says, how has Case Keenum looked throughout camp? He's looked like Case Keenum. And that is a little bit up, a little bit down, never too high, never too low, kind of consistently average. If you're asking how he's looked in comparison to Baker Mayfield, it is clear that Baker Mayfield should be the starting quarterback on this team. It's really not a question. The difference between Baker Mayfield and Case Keenum is a pretty large difference between Baker Mayfield and Case Keenum. That being said, Case Keenum's looked fine. He's made some plays here or there. You know, he's not as mobile as Baker Mayfield. He can't move around as much, and he's not as accurate and doesn't have the arm strength at all that Baker Mayfield has. So, like, he's a clear step down from Baker Mayfield, but he's fine. But that's it for this week's Q&A. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day and have a good night.